Today's video is going to be another installment of would I buy these palettes if they were coming out now? Like if these palettes had never launched before this and they were coming out now. So I do have some holiday palettes in this mix that I picked out randomly. And what's funny is that since we are in the month of October, some brands don't just release Halloween palettes, they release pretty much a ton of Christmas palettes around this time, because if you guys haven't been keeping up with the makeup industry and when things start releasing now, they pretty much release Christmas palettes starting at the end of September now. It's not even October anymore that they'll wait for. So I'm going to share with you guys the 10 palettes that I picked out blindly out of my drawer, and we're just going to get started. So we only have 3 ColourPop palettes in this mix this time. And originally I had picked out 2 like neutral 9 pans from ColourPop, and I was like, let's change it up and pick out one other 9 pan. So the one that I reached for, and this was actually the last one I fished out of my drawer, was the ColourPop Or Kid You Not palette. And I don't think I have talked about this palette yet in this series. So this is the Or Kid You Not palette, and at first when this palette came out, I wasn't really sure if I was going to pick it up, and then I kept on going back to it and eyeing it. And honestly, if this palette would be coming out now, I would 1000% be picking this palette up. I think it's such a gorgeous, deep color story for the fall. And I just think that these are such beautiful, plummy, purpley tones that you can go so deep and very like smoky with this palette, and I love that. I love these grungy purple colors. This is such a beautiful fall color story, and the shimmers in here are just beautiful, and I just think that the formula in this 9 pan is one of their absolute best, if not their best formula, besides the Wine and Only palette. This one pretty much knocks it out of the park for me, so yes, I would be picking this up 100%. I am trying to slow down with my ColourPop purchases lately though, and I am on a no buy in general, but this is a fantasy scenario, and yes, I would be picking out this palette. I love this palette. I think it's so pretty, and this definitely adds something to my collection. I was really lacking these colors in my collection before I picked up this palette, and this is one of my most used ColourPop palettes since I've gotten it. I love it, and I love every single look that comes out of it, and I think this is one of their best collections that has come out in the past like 2 years, and more people really do want ColourPop to launch like deeper types of palettes like this, because it works for so many different skin tones, and I think that this is one of their best curated 9 pans that they've ever come out with. So again, originally I did hesitate when this came out. I can't remember when this came out. It didn't come out this year. I think it came out earlier last year is what I believe. I didn't pick it up until like November or December last year, and I have no regrets. I love it so much. So that is the first palette. Okay, second palette is another ColourPop 9 pan, but I just figured to get those out of the way first, and this one is the ColourPop Nude Mood palette. Now with this palette, again, I did hesitate with this palette when it first came out, and honestly, I probably am not sure if I would actually pick up this palette if it came out now. I feel like I would admire it from afar, but I feel like it would end up in my collection at some point. Because when this palette initially came out, I think it came out back in 2020. It was when, COVID was first starting to happen and lockdown was starting for a lot of different places and also for a lot of businesses. And this collection actually did launch as like pretty much ColourPop's last collection before lockdown started. So that meant that no businesses could send out anything. They couldn't send out orders for like 3 months. So probably I would still hesitate though, but this is when it would initially when it was coming out at the time. I skipped over it completely. I didn't buy any makeup for like a little while. But if this was coming out now, I probably would still skip over it, but eventually I probably would get this. I didn't get this from ColourPop though. I got this from Ulta's not Ulta's website, from Ulta, from my Ulta store. This is a really beautiful neutral little palette, and it's such an easy palette to use, and I really love it because it's warm tone neutrals, and you guys know how much I love warm tone neutrals. But since I had the Going Coconuts palette, I didn't think that I really necessarily needed this, but I have no regrets having this palette in my collection. It's become one of my favorite neutral palettes that I own because it's just so beautiful. I love these sparkly shimmers, and I really love this deeper like chocolatey brown shimmer. And the mattes in here work so easily, and I love that I pretty much have everything that I need in here for a neutral palette. The same thing with the Going Coconuts palette. That's why I love both of them so much. I do prefer the formula in this one over the Going Coconuts though, because this is more of their newer updated formula. Even though this did come out 2 years ago, I still think that the mattes are better in here than the Going Coconuts palette. But would I necessarily need this now? Probably not. So I would say no to this, but that doesn't mean I regret having this in my collection at all, because I really do love it. But if it was launching now, it would just be another neutral palette. I probably would admire it from afar and still lust over holiday releases. And I did pick up one holiday release that came out yesterday, and I cannot wait to get it. I did pick up the Oden's Eye Christmas Day palette. I didn't pick up both, even though I was kind of wanting to. I was like, Caitlin, just pick up one that you know that you love more than the other one, and I ended up picking up that one, and I can't wait to get it. So I would say no to the Nude Mood, and yes, there are kid you not. So one yes and one no so far. Okay, so next up, speaking of Oden's Eye, I did fish out this one from my display shelf because I try to at least get one from the display shelf to talk about, not just from my palette drawer. So the next palette is the Oden's Eye Hummingbird palette from the Fancy Face. And before I even get into whether or not I would get this, this would be an 100% yes. Because this palette and this series with the Fancy Face, Annette's Makeup Corner, and It's Judy Time launched pretty much at this time last year, and I ended up picking up all three palettes. I picked up this one first because, again, this would be an absolute no-brainer to me. If this came out right now, I would 100% be picking it up. Like, in this fantasy scenario, if the Christmas launch was not their launch for fall and winter this year, it would be this, and I would 100% be picking this up because I absolutely love the Fancy Face. I would pick it up no matter what color story it was because I really do love her. And I did fall in love with the Oden's Eye formula last year, and this would be like my first big Oden's Eye purchase because I did only pick up the Frisia Diva palette last year, and that was my first palette to try from the brand. But ever since that palette, and I've since picked up this one in the Legendary Diversa collection, I've absolutely fallen in love with Oden's Eye's formula. But also I love that Frisia Diva palette anyway, but I really think that they upped their formula even more with the Legendary Diversa collection. I think that this collection of palettes really got the brand noticed by a lot of people, and this collection is my favorite influencer collection of all time. And the formula and the matte formula and the shimmer formula are absolutely phenomenal. I would pick this up no hesitation, but mainly because it is a collab with Tina, and I absolutely love her. So this would be 1,100% yes, because I absolutely love Tina. So, and I love Oden's Eye. So it's really hard for me to say no to certain Oden's Eye releases because they really do knock it out of the park, and that's why I got the Christmas Day palette. So really love this palette, so I would have to say yes. Okay, number 4 is a brand I am no longer purchasing from, but I just wanted to include it in this video, and it was a palette I fished out of my drawer. This is the only palette that I haven't decluttered from this brand, and that is the Gourmand Girls That Time of Year palette. And the reason why I would pick up this palette is because it's a collab with my favorite sisters and some of my favorite YouTubers on YouTube, and that is Debbie, Xenia, and Riri. I absolutely love all three of them, and I would be picking up this palette 100% because I would be supporting the three of them. I don't necessarily support this brand anymore, but I do support them, and I absolutely love and adore them. And I really think that this is a very beautiful Christmas color story. I actually haven't touched it since Christmas last year. I really do want to get some use out of it this Christmas, but honestly, I think it's more of like a Christmas vibes palette. And that's why I kind of skipped over the Christmas Eve palette, because you do have some blues in here and some really beautiful shimmery duochromes in here that are stunning. So I really would like to get some more use out of this palette this holiday season. And also, this would kind of make perfect sense to come out right now. Sorry, my mirror just fell. Let me put that back. Because, like I said, most brands are starting to release holiday palettes around this time. So, I would say yes because I love the influencers that did this palette, but I would be a little hesitant because I am no longer supporting this brand. So, it would kind of be with a little bit of a grain of salt because the money would be going to the brand, but I would be picking it up because I absolutely love the YouTubers that did this palette, because I love Debbie. You guys know she's like my soul sister. She's like, I love her to death. So I would have to pick up this palette, and I love Riri and I love Xenia. So I would say yes to this only because of the collab that it is, collaborators that it's with. So I would say yes to this palette as well. Okay, so that's number 4. So number 5 is, again, a brand I really don't purchase from anymore, but that's because I don't think that their releases are that great anymore. But number 5 is the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette. Now, this probably wouldn't be coming out around this time because it is a heat palette, so you would think, summertime about this palette. But this is actually a really pretty fall palette as well. I mean, I really don't use this palette anymore, to be honest, but honestly, I don't know if I would be a sucker for this. I would probably be on the fence about it. But I would probably end up getting this because I would just be solely curious on whether or not the formula is good. I mean, I did just sell my Wild West palette a couple of months ago. And that was the most recent Naked palette that I got. And I really didn't think the formula was all that great. I prefer the formula in this palette. And y'all know I am an absolute sucker for warm neutrals. That's why I got this palette, because I absolutely love warm neutrals. And I do really think that this is my favorite color story that they've ever done besides the Honey palette. And I do think the formula in this palette is really good, actually. So it is a really good warm tone neutral palette, but I probably could talk myself out of this because, again, there's so many other brands that I feel like are better now. And actually, someone did request on my YouTube channel to compare this with the Beauty Bay Fiery palette because I think it's a little bit similar, and honestly I feel like I could get a much similar vibe to this palette just by getting that palette, and I probably would get that palette over this if they were both launching now. But that palette is not included in this video, but I just think Urban Decay is a little bit too overpriced for what is on the market now, because there's so many good indie brands and so many good shimmers and beautiful shimmers out there that you can get over a basic Naked palette from Urban Decay. So I would probably end up saying no to this. So I would say no, but I don't regret having this because I've gotten so much use out of this palette over the years. But that was only because I didn't really know what indie brands were out there when I was collecting the Naked palette. So, but I'm telling you right now, if this was coming out right now, I would be much more interested in what indie brands would be releasing over Urban Decay. So I would probably say no to this palette. Okay, so number 6 is the Haus Labs Stupid Love palette. Now, this was my second palette from Lady Gaga, and honestly, again, without even saying whether or not I would debate this, I would 100% be picking this up because this is Gaga and this is Haus Labs, and I do collect Haus Labs palettes. So I would be picking this up, no hesitation, but I would say 100% yes. But maybe after watching a few reviews on this, I'm not really sure, but I wouldn't even be watching reviews on this because, again, I would 100% be picking this up. I've gotten quite a bit of use out of this palette. This palette launched back in 2020 as well. So I didn't necessarily have too many places to wear this palette out because it has a lot of blues in it, but I was utilizing the neutral side quite a bit. And I actually really do love the matte formula in this palette. It's the shimmer formula in this palette that's really not that amazing. Honestly, some of the shimmers in here are really, really difficult to pick up. But again, because it is Lady Gaga, I would be picking this up because I do collect her palettes. She hasn't released a new palette or an eyeshadow palette yet with her new rebranded brand because it's now in Sephora and they rebranded to make it like clean and vegan and all of that, but they haven't released an eyeshadow palette yet. But I'm guessing she's probably going to release a holiday palette probably sometime at the end of this month or November. I just feel like she's probably going to do that because she's now in Sephora and she's going to have to compete with all the other holiday releases. So I have a feeling she's probably going to release some holiday collections or some type of holiday palette. So I'm kind of holding out to see what she releases next. I still haven't purchased anything from her new clean line because it's a little bit expensive, and I have a bunch of things from this older collection of products that she had that I really didn't feel like I had to pick up her new products right away because I have all 3 of her bigger eyeshadow palettes that released with the original Haus Labs. I have the Love for Sale palette, and I also have the original Glam Room 1 palette, and I actually prefer the formula over with those palettes over this one. Just the shimmers in here are very hard to pick up, but again, I would 100% be picking this up because this does add something very different to my collection. I don't really have any other color story that is quite like this, and the blues in here are phenomenal quality. The blues are so amazing, these blue matte shades. And the orange, just again, her matte formula is actually quite great. Quite great. It's actually quite good, I mean. But her shimmers are not amazing. But again, I would be picking this up no hesitation because it's Gaga. So I would have to say 100% yes. Okay, 4 more palettes. So number 7 was a newer brand to me last year. And this is the Moira Almond Cookie Always on My Mind Sweet Series palette. Now, the reason why I picked up this palette is because I wanted to pick up the blushes that were going all over Instagram and social media. I really feel like that Moira is a very underhyped brand. I actually think that their products are pretty damn good. This palette really did surprise me on how much I actually loved it. But honestly, I probably would be able to skip over this palette. If it was coming out now, I might get it like later on. But they have like kind of released other palettes the past couple months that I would have wished that I would have picked up over this one. I use this palette, but honestly, I don't use it quite enough anymore to justify really having this. But also, since the formula is so good and this is the only palette that I own from Moira, that's why I keep it in my collection. I mean, I love my looks every time I use this palette, and the mattes are phenomenal quality and the shimmers are so good. Like, honestly, have zero problems with this palette. It's really a really great formula. I just wish that there was like one more shimmer in here because even though I say I am a little bit overwhelmed with shimmers, I would love at least one more shimmer option in here because it's quite a matte heavy palette. But if this was coming out now, I probably could say no to it because I feel like if Moira was releasing another palette down the road, I probably would pick up that instead. Or who knows? But if this was coming out now, I probably wouldn't get it because I would have so many other palettes that I would be interested in if they were coming out now in this video. So I probably could say no, but I do highly recommend this brand because I think that their quality is so good. And I really do enjoy the formula of this. So that is the Moira palette. Sorry, I'm just getting a little bit thirsty. I have to leave in a few minutes, but we're almost done. So that one I could probably say no to. Okay, so number 8. Number 8 is another ColourPop palette, and that is the ColourPop Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer palette. I just think this palette is so freaking cute, and honestly, if this palette was coming out now, again, it would be making perfect sense because a lot of brands are releasing holiday releases right now, so this would be right on the trend and right on brand for ColourPop to be releasing this collection right now. And at first I was like, I don't know, because I was picking up so many ColourPop palettes at the time. But honestly, if this was coming out now, I would 100% pick it up because it would be, again, this was the first holiday palette that was coming out for ColourPop. And if this was the first holiday palette that was coming out for ColourPop this year, no hesitation would be picking this up. And the quality of this palette is actually one of their best palettes I've ever used. The shimmers in here are so metallic and beautiful. It's so wet looking and buttery. And the mattes in here blend so well. And I just love the color selection in here. I love that you get such a good array of warm tone mattes in here, but you also get some cool tone mattes, some greens, some reds, and I just think this is such a beautiful holiday palette. I used this palette so much last holiday, and I would not hesitate at all to pick this up again. Even though I did pick up the Christmas Day palette recently, this would be something that I would not have from ColourPop because, again, would be their first holiday release, and I just think that this is so adorable. Again, I did initially hesitate on picking up the palette. I was just going to pick up the highlighter and the lipstick, but then I was like, this is their first holiday palette. I was like, I really wanted to try it. No regrets. It's beautiful. And again, I really do feel like I would get a lot of use out of it during the holiday season because y'all know I love ColourPop. So I would definitely say yes. And the packaging kind of came off of the top. This didn't really have a true box to it. It's just like this open, which I'm kind of like not feeling. I wish that they would have just made it the same as the inside and not have like this lining out here because it does easily get destroyed, but it's okay. So I would definitely say yes to that palette. Okay, 2 more palettes. The next one I'm actually wearing on my eyes today, and that one is the Sigma Nude Mod palette. And again, no hesitation would be picking this palette up because this would be my second palette from the brand after trying the Ambiance palette and how much I fell in love with the Ambiance palette. And I did mention that palette in the first round of palettes that I talked about in my first installment of this series. And ever since I tried that palette, I fell in love with it. So if this palette was coming out right now from Sigma, I would 100% be picking it up. This was the palette that I was eyeing from the get-go. After I tried the Ambiance palette, I was like, wow, their formula is amazing. I'd be like, no questions asked, I would be picking this up for the fall and winter because I think that this is such a beautiful fall and winter neutral palette. I've been using it so much ever since I got it. I'm trying to use it at least once a week this fall and winter, and I just absolutely love every single look I use with this palette and do with this palette because their shimmers are so phenomenally sparkly and beautiful on the lid, and their mattes are just so incredibly pigmented and so easy to work with. I love my makeup every single time I use a Sigma palette, and this palette is just gorgeous. And I just love the color selection in here. I mean, maybe I would be a little bit hesitant because after owning this palette, I feel like the neutrals are a bit repetitive in here and they get a little bit boring. But honestly, ever since I stopped using it for a little while to use some other new palettes that came into my life, and I've went back to this, I really have been enjoying it again, and I feel like I love it. So I would definitely be picking this up. It's just such a gorgeous palette, and I was just honestly blown away by the Sigma formula. So I would definitely be saying yes to this palette. Okay, and then the last palette that I have is definitely a palette I regret getting. So I think you would probably already know. I wouldn't be thrilled about picking this up. And the last palette is the Luminous Cosmetics and Sir John collab palette. Can't Wait to Be Queen Lion King palette. Now, I've been so on the fence about keeping this palette in my collection for the past like year or so. But people actually told me, even though this is a endorsed collection from Sir John, and Sir John is Beyonce's makeup artist, he did this palette and collection for the live action Disney movie that came out back in, I think, 2020, possibly. And they came out, sorry, this packaging is so reflective. The color story is so pretty though, and the quality is actually so good. But I did find out after like a few months after owning this palette that Luminous Cosmetics is an MLM company. So I have since not purchased anything since I got this eyeshadow palette, but I was like, since it's coming out officially as a Disney collab for the Disney movie with Sir John, I was like, Disney has to officially endorse every single collab that they come out with, because it's Disney. Hello, like you have to have Disney's approval to do anything with their licensed products and their movies. Then I was like, oh, well, it should be fine, but then I found out a couple months later that they're an MLM. So I would definitely not be picking up this palette now. I am on the fence on whether or not I'm keeping it, but I really have not used this in like a year, but I would definitely say no to this palette now. But the formula and the looks that I've created with this palette have been so pretty. The shimmers are so gorgeous and the mattes are so easy to use and work with. But I really haven't touched this palette in quite a while, so I would definitely say no. And if like other Christmas palettes would be coming out now, and like other Disney collabs with ColourPop, I would definitely be picking those up over this palette. So that is all the palettes, you guys. So let's show you guys the palettes I would definitely be getting, and the palettes that I could say no to. So I have 6 yeses. So we have the Sigma New Mod, the ColourPop Rudolph, the Stupid Love House Labs, the That Time of Year by Gourmand Girls, the Odin's Eye Hummingbird and the Fancy Face palette, and the Or Kid You Not palette by ColourPop would be the yeses. And then the no's, or what I could admire from afar, would be the Luminous Cosmetics Lion King palette, the Moira Always on My Mind palette, the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette, and the Nude Mood palette by ColourPop. So not terrible. 60% I would say yes to, 40% I would say no to. So that's not terrible. So I think the first video I was an even split. 5 I said yes to, and 5 I said no to. So that's it, you guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. So please like and subscribe. Follow me on my Instagram at TBW819 and check out my Poshmark at the same handle. Let me know if you guys have, thought about this fantasy scenario. Would you pick up any of these palettes? Do you own any of these palettes? Are any of these palettes your favorite? Please leave it in the comments below. I would love to know. Y'all know I'm nosy. And I will be leaving the original creator of this video on the description box below, and I also got this idea by Batty Bean's channel, so I will be leaving her video of her most recent video. She just posted one like 2 days ago of this fantasy scenario. So yeah, that's it, you guys, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.